Hey everyone, Arshit here for another GAMSAT podcast. I'm with Chris today. Chris, right? So a lot of you have seen the video on Facebook, his reaction video to seeing his scores. Quite funny. I really like the end part where he's like, "That's a win." We just had some dumplings downstairs from a little place around the corner. Best dumplings in Melbourne, at least my favorite dumplings in Melbourne. But if you want to know, you'll have to send me a message. I'm not going to reveal on podcast. Anyway, as most of you already know, Chris scored an 89 overall in the GAMSAT. Absolutely smashed it out. Congratulations to you, Chris.
Yeah, thanks.
That's a really awesome score. We were getting heaps of emails, heaps of texts, comments, kind of just saying, we want to know how Chris did it, right? What did he do? How did he use the course? Like, how did he actually achieve that, right? Because obviously, an 89 is probably the highest score for this actual September GAMSAT, and possibly one of the highest scores ever. Absolutely.
It feels pretty strange.
Yeah.
So this is 8 days after results were released, and it's been a very strange 8 days.
Sweet.
I'll definitely.
Awesome. Anyway, thanks for coming in, Chris. Let's maybe just start off before we actually even get into the GAMSAT. Maybe give a little bit of an introduction about yourself. Tell the people at home who's Chris?
Who's
the man?
Who's the guy in that video?
He's the guy in that video. It's
Yeah,
like, I think the last time we checked, it was in the tens of thousands amount of views.
God,
So
that's scary.
Who is the man, the myth, the legend, Chris?
Yeah. So my name's Chris. If you're listening to this, you may have or probably have seen that video. So I guess a little bit about me. I'm 28. I haven't been studying for a few years. So previously I've done a Bachelor of Science and a Master's of Engineering, specializing in biomedical engineering. So I think that is pretty different to a lot of people sitting the GAMSAT. So I think that's quite important for sort of contextualizing my story. For the last few years, I've been jet setting around the world, well, sort of, teaching skiing. So
Dude, you just keep getting cooler. I didn't even know that. I was like,
so
teaching skiing. There you go.
Yeah, so I finished my master's, and throughout the 6 years of study, I sort of came to a realization that my passion wasn't really in engineering. And then what started out initially as like a little short 1 year gap year kind of type thing ended up being 3 years of consecutively like following the snow or wherever it was. So I've taught now in Australia for a few years and Canada and Japan for some companies around the place, which is a huge amount of fun. So if any of you are listening that I've worked with or that I've met along the way, nice.
And if anybody wants skiing lessons, I think you know who to go to as well.
Yeah, we'll see.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I did better on the GAMSAT than I have in my teaching exams. But
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Sweet. All right. Thanks for
that's all right.
making the time for us to have the chat today,
Yeah.
Chris. I think everyone at home is going to really appreciate some of your thoughts, some of your insights, so on and so forth. So let's maybe start talking about the GAMSAT. Maybe before we get into the crux, each individual sections, do you want to maybe tell us a little bit about your GAMSAT journey? So I know this is your first time sitting in.
Yeah, so this is my first time. So this was my first time. So in March this year, I was in Japan teaching. We had a training day. We got called into a meeting suddenly, and it was like, right, all the countries around the world are kind of like closing their borders. Everyone's got to leave. So we basically got told it was nicer than it sounds, but we kind of got evacuated.
Wow.
So I landed back in Australia the day that the borders shut to foreign residents, and then from then, like everyone who's sort of been in Melbourne or Australia, just following the world, it's kind of been pretty intense. So pretty much just as Melbourne went into like a full lockdown, that was around when I sort of said to myself, right, like this is going to be something that I'm committing into. Like I want to go do med. I want to go do GAMSAT's like the next step on that road. And so basically set out to try and establish like what's the best possible way that I can approach the GAMSAT.
Awesome. And along that journey of thinking about how you could approach the GAMSAT, what happened, what are some of the things you came across, so on and so forth?
Yeah, so like initially I sort of read up about as much information about the exam itself and sort of why it exists. why isn't our uni mark sufficient? Why isn't an interview sufficient? And so I think that went a long way to building this understanding of why I was doing it. So you look at the different sections of the GAMSAT and it's taking new information that you've probably never seen before or presented in a weird way, right? And you've then got to manipulate that and draw relationships out of it. And that's essentially exactly what it is like to do medicine, I assume, right? So you've got a brand new research paper, you've never seen it before, you read it and you go, okay, like this is kind of what's going on with that. You've got, like you come into a new patient sees you or something and you go, okay, here's a set of symptoms I've never like seen in this way before. How does that show me some relationship or some understanding of what's going on beneath the surface? And I think throughout my study and my preparation, whenever I had that moment of like, God, this sucks. Like, what's the point? That whole uncertainty and self-doubt. That being able to come back to that was really helpful, I think. But yeah, so I initially sought out as many resources as I could from kind of everywhere. So not necessarily uniquely GAMSAT resources. Like there's so much information out there for MCAT prep. And while it is quite a different exam, like a lot of the ideas of preparation are still quite applicable to GAMSAT. Likewise, for the British medical, the BMAT test, there's quite a few good resources that I ended up using a bit early on in my prep.
Yeah, and a lot of them they're attempting to test a similar thing.
Yeah.
It's like, are you suitable for medicine,
Yeah.
right? They do it in different ways, and that's a whole different conversation, right? But I do think there is good amount of overlap, at least at a foundational level.
Yeah.
Sweet. Cool. So from there, you were mentioning earlier, and this might be a little bit of a cheeky plug, but you did mention you attended one of the GAMSAT master classes, one of Fraser's master classes.
Having been a ski instructor for several years, like I wasn't exactly flush with cash. So I was kind of just like trying to penny pinch my way to GAMSAT prep. And then when you see this thing that just says, free like Zoom masterclass thing, it's like, sweet, sounds pretty cool. So I checked it out, had a really good time. It was a really nice atmosphere. I got a lot of good insight into the GAMSAT that is just otherwise not really available. Like ASA does not tell you much about the process.
They want to be as vague as possible.
And I think there's definitely a lot of downsides to that as someone sitting it, but I think on the whole, it's definitely, there are benefits to it as well.
Nice.
Yeah.
Sweet. I might just add here, if you're watching this in November, make sure to register for our GAMSAT masterclasses.
Yeah, it's really good.
Coming up
strongly recommend it.
Again, sorry about the cheeky plug, but needs to be done. Sweet. Yeah. Anyway, now that we've kind of thought a little bit about the broader stuff, let's get into the sectional stuff, right? I think that's what everyone is actually here for, talking about each section individually, right? So obviously you did heaps of study and you're one of our comprehensive course students.
That's correct.
Correct? Yeah. Sweet. So I think, is there any particular order you want to go in? Just
section 1, 2, 3, let's do it in the exam. Let's do it in exam order. Let's do it in exam order.
Let's
save the one that I know that there's probably the most questions about to the end.
Awesome. All right, cool. Let's start off with section 1. So how'd you go in section 1? What was your score?
So my section 1 score was 74.
74. That's really impressive. For those of us who don't know how the scores work, there's the bell curve. I'd highly recommend looking at that. We have a scores article. Read that. But for section 1 is a little bit of a weird one because the bell curve is a little bit more congested for section 1, and so as a result, both the ceiling and the ceiling is a lot lower. So something like a section 74 for section 1 is actually a really, really good mark. I'd almost say it's the equivalent of like a low 80 for section 2, right? So it is.
That feels pretty good.
It's a great mark, right?
It is. Like just looking at a number on its own is quite difficult to judge. Kind of like how good do you have to be like. I know that was a question I always had in my prep was like you read a lot online of people being like, oh, if I can get like a 70, then I'm going to be like pretty like comfortable-ish for an application to University X or Y. And so like it was that is definitely one of the questions that I always had in my mind was like, how good do I need to be to be at that level?
Yep.
And we're probably going to talk about it in depth later on, but it's not as good as you might imagine.
Yeah.
Like it's not perfection. I'll
Yeah.
put it that way.
100%. Sweet. Anyway, I'll let you get into section 1.
Yeah.
How did you approach it? How did you, or maybe take us on a journey, right? Not the end result, but maybe where you started off, what your thinking was like, and how that developed into what hopefully got you that mark.
Yeah. So I think, for me, section 1 was the least intuitive of the sections in terms of it was like for section 3, there is for each sort of topic and question type, there are sort of more distinct processes that you can kind of go through to get to an answer or the answer. And it's like, oh, I didn't know how to do that. And you can kind of, it's a very step-by-step process to go, okay, where in this process did I not get the answer? Or where did I veer off the course? Section 1 is a lot more fuzzy, I'll say. So I think, like, from my background, I've been pretty good at reading stuff. Like I can read pretty well, I can write pretty well. So like my use of my vocab is pretty good. So I didn't have a lot of that as a huge barrier. So I think that was a huge benefit while I was prepping. I guess for section 1, I think a lot of it is sort of trying to what I would say is one of the best things that I did was right from the start of my prep, I was logging all of my questions and trying to dissect every question in STEM into like as much detail as I could, right? So from there, I could then look back at like the hundreds of questions that I may have done, or more than that later on. But I could go, okay, I'm terrible at cartoons. What is it about cartoons that I'm not good at? And so one of the things that I really struggled with was finding the balance between taking everything directly from the text, from the STEM, and being very literal with my interpretation of it, versus how much to infer and how much to look beyond what's written on the page. And I really only found that balance about a week or two before the exam. And even then, like on the morning, I was like, I don't know. I really don't know.
Yeah, I feel like section 1, it really is one of those sections. Like out of all 3 of the sections, it's the most section, right?
It's definitely for me, and there's definitely people out there who aren't in this boat, but it was always the least clear how you were doing.
Yep. And I think like there's 2 really interesting points that you mentioned, which I want to touch on, flesh out a bit more, right? Yeah. You mentioned that 1, it's compared to section 3, it's not as stepwise as section 3 and even section 2. And the second thing that you mentioned was almost the solution to that, right? Which is actually logging your questions.
Yeah.
And I think
and not when I say logging, I don't mean just like putting it in a spreadsheet.
Yeah.
There are so many steps once you've done that, that if you don't do it, like it's kind of just a thing
just,
you do.
Yeah, right? It's just almost.
It's a cool thing to like look back and be like, oh, cool, I've done like X many questions.
Yeah, it's like the one thing that I tell students is the purpose of the logbook. And if you haven't seen it, just type Fraser section 1 logbook or section 3 logbook. The purpose of the logbook is to help you reflect.
Yes.
Don't use it to prevent that. Some students almost use the logbook in a way that they kind of prevent themselves from reflecting. And I've told students that if you have a different method of reflection that's not the logbook that you think works better, do you, like by all means. The most important thing that you need to be doing is actually reflecting, right?
Yeah.
Because with section 3, again, easier to see those steps, easier to find out where you went wrong.
Yeah.
Whereas with section 1, you need to take that extra time to really think about what are these steps?
Yeah.
How is it working? How can I think through it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe do you want to talk about, as you were doing that process, and it seems like that was a big part of it, what were some of the difficulties, the roadblocks that you came across?
So I would say in the section 1 space.
Primarily section
Yeah.
one.
So, like one of the things that was really helpful is knowing how to split up the questions, right? So you got like general and specific, and then within that you've got all your subcategories of questions, and so that goes a long way to sort of categorizing your strengths and weaknesses. But I think beyond that, especially when it comes to reflection, every time you make a mistake is information that can help you not make it again. So,
That's such a good point.
and that doesn't like that
I'm gonna
doesn't even
tattoo
have
that
to
on
be
my head.
that doesn't even have to be an error in the sense that you got it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
If you like, so I don't like the idea of really strictly timing yourself early, especially early on. Or this idea that you only have like 90 seconds per question, or however many seconds it may be, because some questions will take much longer, some questions will take far less time. And so if you come to a question and it takes you a while to grasp how to do it, but then once you grasp it, it becomes a lot easier. That's still an opportunity to reflect. Because if you can speed up that friction early on in that process, then you build up this bank of time which can be spent on the really hard stuff later on.
Well, one piece of advice that I actually give my students, and I'm not too sure if I would have said this to you because
Probably.
I don't think, yeah. So one thing I tell a lot of my students for section 1, I tell them for section 3 kind of tokenistically because I'm not really a section 3 tutor anyway, so I'm always like, take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
Maybe with like a bag of salt. Right? But I tell them, I think a really good activity, especially during the periods that you have a lot of time, is if you have a set of 10 questions, do them like roughly to time.
Yeah.
But then before you look at the answers, redo them untimed, right? And then ask yourself, what is the gap in thinking between the two, right? Because sometimes when you're practicing everything under time, you actually don't even have time to think about how you're thinking about things.
Yeah.
And as a result, you don't know what you're learning, right? It's all too embedded in your subconscious for you to think about it, right?
Yeah.
So you can't actually critique yourself. So I think kind of like whether you want to do it that way or another way, having, or the way that Chris was mentioning, having a way to actually be able to understand your own thinking is one of the most important ways you're going to learn in section 1. And in fact, all the sections, but I think it's hardest in section 1. Anyway, seems like you're getting ready to...
like, I think that's kind of the biggest thing is looking back and trying to find any tiny gain that you can. Whether like if you can find a way to save half a second, like in reading a graph or just checking through stuff or whatever, it's like it just builds up and it takes away that time stress that is so prevalent in this sort of exam or in exams generally, really. I suppose like the other big thing that I got sort of probably about a week out from the exam was really like emphasizing that if you invest the time to really understand the STEM and take your time with it to really like build the connections and understand it as best you can, the questions do not take as long as you think. I was quite lucky in my prep that I was generally not running out of time in mock exams and that sort of thing. So I guess that's a luxury that I could afford to have. But I think really take like, I think one of the other, like Akeef was saying in one of the classes that when he sat it, he was like had his finger dragging across the words on the screen as he was sitting the exam. And I was doing exactly the same thing. And then I wasn't thinking about the questions. It was early on in the exam and I was just like, cool, I'm just going to understand this as much as I can, try to piece it all together in my head. So that then if someone just came up and said, hey, what does this mean? And that's basically what the questions are doing, right? They're prompting your understanding of the text. Those answers then came very quickly. Like there's one STEM that sort of comes to mind. I can't remember what it was about, but it was something. It was like, I don't know, 2 or 3 paragraphs. So like a typical length STEM, and read it like carefully, and then it was like I was filling out like a form. I was just like click. It was just like scan through the answers, click it, next question. Scan through the answers, click it, next question. It was, and I was like, oh, okay, this feels good.
That's a great analogy, and if
Yeah.
it does feel like that, it shows the level of
Yeah,
confidence.
and I think the fact that it was like, I don't know, it was probably within the first 20 questions of section one on the day, that feeling went a long way to being like, oh, okay, I'm feeling okay, pretty good.
Sweet. Okay. Awesome. Awesome. So maybe before we move on to section two, because
Yeah.
we've already talked about section one a bit, maybe the final question with section one
Yeah.
is, in the course itself.
Yes.
How did you approach using the material in the course, right? Because I think that's for a
Yeah.
lot of the people that are our
Yeah.
students. They asked us, okay, how did Chris go about using the different components of the course and just
Yeah.
maximizing its value?
So I think that especially for section one, I made like as much use of it as I could. So early on, I was trying to feel my way around just the way the exam's put together. So breaking down, understanding when there's a question that asks you about tone, what is it actually looking for? Like how is tone communicated in a text, and understanding it like that, and then how are all the like building that foundational knowledge to then get given a text or a stem and go, okay, I kind of know where to go from here, and just cutting down on that really conscious concentration to determine what to do in those next steps. So early on, that was definitely my focus. Once I got into sort of PBL time, I was cranking out questions. So for context, my day being in lockdown and not having anything else to do, I was pretty much studying full time for GAMSAT exclusively. So again, maybe not applicable to everyone.
Yep.
But from about, I don't know, 10 till 1-ish, give or take, I would be kind of doing follow-up work from the night before or prep work for the next day, and going through any weaknesses I had in theories. So for section 3 especially, but for section 1 as well, if I wasn't sure about like poetry or whatever, or like just reading about how things are put together, like what is the common structure of a poem that's used across kind of all poems, right? So once you kind of get that, you can go, oh, if a question says, oh, like what's the environment this is taking place in, you kind of get an idea of where to look, right? So that was really helpful. And then in the afternoons, I would basically just crank out questions. So I was pretty much trying to do, on lighter days, I would be happy with doing 20 or 30. On heavy days, I was doing almost 200.
That's a lot of questions.
There were not many days that I did that many, but there were like some days that I did.
Big days.
Yeah, exactly. So like having the question bank and set up in such a way that it basically just fed you new questions that you'd never seen before, because I think that's probably the one thing that's really, really difficult to do independently, is to have enough questions that you can consistently give yourself new information. Because like if your main resource for questions is just like the provided ASA material, like the sample questions and the practice exam things, there's only so many questions there. And if early on you do one of them to sort of get your head around how it all works, and then a week out from the exam, you've already gone through a lot of those questions, you're not genuinely testing your ability to decode and interpret this novel information, because that is in and of itself a skill that is being tested.
Sweet. No, I think those are all really good points. Final question.
Yes.
For section 1 follow-up, because you brought up a good point. And this one will be like just a 2-3 word answer. What was the ratio of time spent doing questions to reflection?
Ooh. Just
roughly. 1:1, 1:5. For every hour on reflection, how many hours of questions?
So I was doing fairly well in my questions. So I think for every question that I felt there was something to really reflect on, like I would probably be spending more time than I did on the question. So more time on reflection than doing the question itself.
Interesting.
And like not in a huge amount. Like I wasn't spending half an hour working out how to work out the tone from this one question. Right? Like that's a bit much. But and it's also hard to break up how much time you spend doing questions when you get 6 questions to a stem or something like that. But it wasn't always. Yeah, so I'd say like maybe skewed towards reflection, but on the whole, I definitely probably spent more time doing questions than reflecting, just because I was getting quite a lot of things right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Oh, sweet. Let's leave section one at that, and let's go to section 2.
Yes.
So section 2, you said it was an
83.
83. Very nice. Again, very good score. Probably out of the 15,000 or so sitters, I'd say that's definitely in the top 100, probably in the top 20, 50, somewhere around there. So
cool.
that's really solid.
Yeah.
We had another student for section 2 get a 91, which is
awesome.
Which is like, oh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
But 83 definitely killed it. That's so good. Let's bit more fun.
Yes.
I always like talking about section 2.
I
could see towards the end of the section 1 conversation, I was like, let's get a bit more excitement.
Section 2 is fun. So this is coming from someone who has done science for the last, a couple of years skipped, but like I'm very much a section 3 STEM guy.
Yeah.
I really like section 2. It was always the hardest to motivate myself to do. Like just going, now I've got to plan an essay and write an essay. Like it always felt kind of like a chore. But then it's like an hour is not very long. So I really like section 2. It sort of is like a palate cleanser after section 1 and into section 3.
I think that's a really good way to describe it. It's a palate cleanser.
Yeah.
Anyway, do you want to tell us a little bit about how you approached and your development in section 2, what you focused on?
So I guess one of the things I worked out early on in my prep was that I guess what would be considered like an argumentative or persuasive style, like a format suited my writing. So having like some thesis or some contention and then articulating why, that was my belief, right? It came most naturally to me. I know that some other people have had successes with other things, but that didn't really work for me. So I think early on trying to work out what works for you, right? And if you do that on your own or with a tutor or with just someone who like is willing to give you feedback. I know that I've reached out to people on Facebook and had really, really cool discussions about how essays work and how they write and how I write and what you could change to make it better. So I think that was a very important thing early on to kind of work out the skeleton of your writing. From there, it essentially becomes, how can I develop a systematic approach to essays such that no matter what ACER throws at me, I can deal with it in some way, right? There's always that possibility that ACER is going to give you some super abstract thing that you've never thought about directly. But having like a way to go, okay, like how does this affect me? Was like one of the, like, how does this affect people is kind of one of the questions that I would ask myself. And then from there you can sort of say, okay, like here's an effect. There's some sort of process that goes on from whatever that theme is. So there's like a theme, a process, and some effect. And then how can I describe that throughout my essay?
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that the thing that you pointed out there that I think is really important is all of how does this affect people, right? That's one of the most important things with section 2, right? With section 2, to an extent, they're testing your humanity, right? They're not going to give you a theme that is detached from humanity. They're not going to be like the theme is trees and you can write like
because they broadly describe it as what is it? It's like social issue, like themes, and then interpersonal themes, I think is something along those lines. And so embedded in that is like the key part isn't the word theme, it's the other bit.
I think it's socio-cultural and socio-individual or something
something to that effect.
We describe it as interpersonal and intrapersonal, something like that.
That makes sense.
Sweet. Anyway, that's awesome. I actually really like that whole understanding your style of writing, your way of writing. I think the important thing to remember with section 2 is we learn from other people, but never go down the pathway of just copying and templating and just
No.
like,
No.
taking someone else's essay and hoping it would work.
Yeah.
There's a very off chance that you might get lucky and the theme that guy wrote the essay on comes up.
Yeah,
But
so
it's very off.
Yeah, with that, I would, if you want to imagine what it's like to read, like what the difference is in sort of reading that kind of thing. Think about a time where you've seen someone read directly off a script versus just talking.
Like this right here. Natural.
I don't know which is it. But yeah, that like you've probably seen like politicians especially or that sort of thing giving speeches, and you can tell when they are going verbatim from something they've prepared versus understanding the ideas and the concepts that they're trying to present, and then having like a more quote unquote natural like flow to the speech. That's kind of how I think about it, as the difference between having this sort of pre-done framework, like maybe not framework, but like essay where you're just kind of slotting in the different pieces to fit the theme.
Yeah, you definitely want to have like prepared ideas and all this kind of stuff.
Yes.
But like, I think that the key thing to stay away from is a fixed template where you're just chopping and changing.
Yeah, definitely,
words.
definitely. So
Sweet.
so like one of the things that I think is really important in Section 2 prep especially is like building up that. So it's all about how these themes relate to people, right? And so you've got all these different ways that we interact with the world around us, and that we are affected by that environment that affect us, and the ways that it does that. Like for me, I find like economics really interesting. I don't want to study it, but think like movies like The Big Short, I find really interesting just in and of like it's the way that environment just exists. I just think it's really quite fascinating. And so for me, like one of the things that I would do is find a YouTube clip video about some economic theory or whatever, and I'd go, oh, that's like I was doing it because it was interesting to me, but then it also prompted questions which, in answering and thinking about myself, gave me fuel for future S2 essays. So I think that little bit at the end is the part that's often absent from some advice in Section 2 online. And when people sort of say, oh, read widely, like that's kind of your very surface level advice for Section 2.
Read widely, but think about what you're reading as well.
Yes.
Right? I really like that point. And sorry to interrupt.
No,
it's like, you don't want to, like the way that I describe it is you don't want to just take this information and add it to a whole block of information in your mind and it just keeps growing.
Yes.
Rather, what you want to do is take that information and think about it in relation to the rest of the information in your head, and then synthesize it into something that belongs to you. This is my opinion.
Yeah, you're trying to, you're drawing connections between all the different things that you know and that you've experienced, right?
That's such good advice. I really like that.
Yeah. Like everyone's gonna, like my experience in life is quite different to yours, I assume, right? Like I'm kind of made for the first time today, but the way that we could take that information, that same news article or same report or something, and then turn that into, how does, like, if someone then asked us both, how does that affect like society? We might have totally different positions, we might have totally different reasonings, or some combination within. I think that's really important to come to terms with quite early in your prep, because it makes the rest of everything, it turns it from less of like a chore of I need to craft the perfect essay into I'm just going to learn stuff because it's fun and then write about it.
Yeah, sweet.
I think that's
awesome. No, I think that's really good advice. So let's jump onto our final question for Section 2.
Yes.
Same one that we had for Section 1.
Yes.
Then we can move into, I think, the one that most people are waiting for at home. The old doozy. But anyway, Section 2. How did you approach the course and get the most out of it? I know you had Siddiq as your Section 2 tutor.
Awesome. Shout out to
Siddiq.
Yeah, thanks, mate.
Absolute meme. Yeah, I know all of our tutors are great, but one thing I'll say about Siddiq, he's probably the most fun tutor.
He's he's awesome.
Yeah, you're gonna have a lot. Like one thing we will guarantee is if Sadiq's your tutor, you will have a laugh.
Yeah.
It's just absolute memes and bants. Anyway, how did you approach the course and maximizing its value?
I think so. This is kind of applicable across all sections, but whenever you go into talking with a tutor, is to know what you want to have answered beforehand. Like you don't know the answer, right? Because that's why you're asking. But you could say, okay, like when I was writing this essay from last week, I really struggled with I felt like my intro was really bad, or I every time I write an essay, I never feel like my conclusion is any good. Like those are some things that I always struggled with. How do I know when I've planned enough was another one, right? And so that's kind of like, it was sort of quite close to the exam that I sort of came up with, well, with some help, came up with the sort of process effect kind of thing that I used in my planning. So to have this theme and then break it down into some process, which I'm then talking about, with a lot of help from Sadiq and Osman. Thank you guys. Yeah, so I think like that's kind of, for me, the majority of my personal interaction with people in the course was S2. I didn't make the most use of my other tutors because I was like, oh, I feel kind of okay. And then it got to the needed exam and I was like, oh God, I've got so many left. I really need to start using these. Yeah, so I think, ask questions, talk to the other people in your section 2 tut group. We had a big group chat going on, and that honestly kept me sane. Like it was awesome sharing the whole process, like the whole prep process with people, and going, like at the end of each week after we submit our essays, being like, oh God, like, how did you feel about section task B? That was awful. Like it was so savage. Like whoever came up with that, like, ugh,
screw up.
It was you, wasn't it?
It's always me.
Yeah.
If there's anything you don't enjoy in the course, it's guaranteed.
Yeah. But yeah, like it's just try to make the most out of it. Like try to talk about like the different ideas, because like you always want to try to go from, like when I'm talking about, I don't know, give me a theme, or like whatever theme it might be. Like you want to try to go from, I talked about this aspect of like, I don't know, anger, right? To be able to reflect for section 2, you have to take away all like the specifics of that particular essay. You've got to take it back to this general, like, how do I have like just these steps that I can then go, okay, like this is my theme, slot the theme in here, think about it a bit, get an essay at the end, right? So I think that's kind of the thing the overall goal of section 2 prep. Because then if the mythical, what was it? Space flight essay, or something like that, space travel as a section 2 theme, right? Like, how do you write about that? You have to go like, okay, well, I don't know, technological benefits, I guess. Sure, let's do it.
Yeah, sweet, cool. Thanks for that, Chris. I think those are all like really really good points. Let's jump into the last one.
Yes. Section 3.
Section 3.
Yeah.
Cool. So going to be the same question. So I think you already know what the first question is.
Yes, I do.
How did you approach it? What was your experience?
Section 3 was a strange one. So, like right at the start of my prep, I was actually listening to one of the first podcasts that the Fraser's podcasts was, and it was 98 in section 3. I think was the title of it. Yeah. And there was something that...
No, we're going to make one for you, 99
Yeah, I guess, yeah. So there was a really good nugget of information in there. Yeah, it was all very good, but this one sort of stood out to me. It was that there was a realization that you can get... This was from the 110 question, section 3. Whereas I only got 75, which was pretty sweet. 75 questions. But this idea that you can get 10 questions wrong, 15, 30 questions wrong, whatever, and still do really well. So I imagine like when people just see that video of me checking my scores and they see the 99, it's like, this guy must be perfect. I'm not. So I think that having that reassurance that there's going to be questions that are just too like you either can't do or are impractically long to do in the exam or mock exam or whatever it is, and you just go, I've spent too long on this question, I'm moving on, cut your losses, go. And there were questions that I got to that point within the exam, and I just went, I could spend another 3 minutes on this to know that I feel comfortable with my answer, but I'm just going to select this and go to the next question, write it down, write whatever number it was on my sheet of paper, and then come back to it if I've got time. So finding that balance is really, really important.
The way that I like to describe that particular notion is with an economic term, called opportunity cost. I feel like you're lining up to it, right? It's like, what is your opportunity cost with that extra time spent here? Yeah. You might spend an extra 5 minutes and get that question right, but you've lost 3 marks that you would get later, right? And I think opportunity cost, honestly, I kind of live a lot of my life by opportunity cost, definitely. Right? How is basically a basic definition of opportunity cost is the thing that you're getting.
It's like, how else could you spend your time?
How else could you spend your time? There you go. Yeah, tick the words. Not out of my mouth, but it said it better than I would.
Yeah. Like, so spending that extra 5 minutes on some like question that you're like, oh, I don't know. Like, you might be 60, 70% confident on that answer, and you're like, I want 100. Like, I want to feel good. It's still worth 1 mark, or whatever 1 mark equates to after ACER does all its little crazy stuff behind the scenes. And that time could just be spent doing like 2 or 3 easier questions, which get you like just as much, if not more, benefit.
Yeah, I think sweet.
So like I think in terms of like my broad strategy for section 3, early on was kind of just taking stock of what I was good at and what I wasn't. So for me, coming from an engineering background, I was very comfortable with maths, very comfortable with physics questions generally. Chemistry, like hit and miss. A lot of it I was pretty comfortable with, but like pH wasn't super cool. Like, I just always struggled with it. Thermodynamics, also kind of tricky. And then organic chemistry just always has those. There's always like some kind of way that a question can be asked in organic that just throws you.
For sure.
And bio, I'm terrible at pathway questions and genetics. Like, those were identifying those early on, being like, this sucks. I don't know how to do this. Yeah.
And were you much of a logger for section 3 as well?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Love a cheeky log in section 3.
I mean, like I essentially had an Excel spreadsheet that was running my life at one point. I had like all sorts of stuff. So as an aside, while I was doing this whole full-time study thing, I sort of bought some stuff and had like a little home gym. And so I was doing like some little gymnastic stuff.
You're looking lean.
I don't know, man. I was leaner before. And so in the afternoon, like, I would have some like a snack lunch sort of thing, and then I would, like, one of my goals was to, during lockdown, learn how to do a handstand.
There you go.
I can kind of do a handstand now. Nice. Not perfect, but I can do it.
Nice. It's so much easier
to
do a handstand.
But having some way to completely distract yourself from whatever you're stressing about.
I like
that.
Be
it university or work or life in general or GAMSAT.
Sweet.
Being able to completely switch off my brain at a conscious level was really, really good. Anyway, so I was logging everything. I was logging like how much I weighed, how I was doing with like these different exercises. Was I getting better? Was I like being able to do more or less or whatever? But I think with logging, it's very easy to become overly wedded to the idea that you have to always improve. There's going to be an amount of, I suppose, noise on whatever you're measuring, right? Like, that's, like, you're not always going to progress linearly. In fact, you very rarely will. You're going to have a dip in your performance. Like you might get 70% of questions right one time and then 55 the next, and then there's that one PBL that completely crushes your confidence and you get 20%. Speaking from experience, I still don't know what happened.
Thanks.
Yeah. And that was section 1. But yeah, like that bothered me. I was like, why? Like, what is going on? Like, what have I done that's led to this? And it's really normal to have self-doubt while you're studying. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, logging everything. I think it's really important to use it as a tool for reflection. It helps you. It isn't in and of itself. Knowing your overall percentage of questions in chemistry that you get right doesn't actually help you.
Yeah.
Like going, I got like 70% of questions. Cool. Or 50% or 40%, or whatever it is. So you're looking for sudden, anything that sticks out, right? Like if you're averaging 50% of section 3 prep, but one of them is 65 and one of them is 30, that sort of tells you something. And so I think do some quick Googling, try to find out how pivot tables work, because being able to break down not just like, was it a question about anatomy or organic chemistry or something like that? Sure, you might have weaknesses within that, but then it could be like a specific way of questions being phrased within that. And so one of the things that I found really useful, especially once I got into sort of mock exam territory, where you're really just trying to fine tune those last little things, because you don't have that much time at this point, was to go, okay, given that it's a question in organic chemistry or a poem in section 1 or whatever, is there like, which of these affects it more? Like, is it the fact that it's a poem that affects it more, or is it the fact that it's a tone question? Am I bad at all tone questions, or am I bad at poetry tone questions?
That's a really good point.
Because like that lets you go, okay, like all of a sudden I'm saying, oh cool, I'm in a tube with you. I'm really struggling with tone in poems. That changes it from your perspective, right?
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, right? And I always tell my students this as well.
Yeah.
If you're going to book a private tube, don't come to me and say, I'm struggling with the GAMSAT, bro. It's like the more vague, the more broad you are, the much harder it is for you to help yourself and for me to help you.
Yeah, and like best case scenario, right? Like you still drill down to the same point, but you've spent 20 minutes of that hour working out what the problem is.
Exactly.
So I think it does everybody the best service to be really engaged with your process of learning, and to know what your weakness. Be honest, right? Like it really sucks to sit down and go, okay, I'm going to study this thing that I'm bad at. It feels bad to get stuff wrong. It feels really good to do a set of questions and go, oh cool, I got like 9 out of 10 or all of them right. That feels so good, but it doesn't help you get better.
Yeah,
necessarily. Like it helps a bit, but it doesn't help a lot. Yeah.
Sweet. All right. Let's finish off section 3, because I feel like this podcast is going on for a while.
I can talk for a bit.
Hopefully everyone's enjoying it.
Yeah.
So, last question for section 3, as with the others, how did you approach maximizing the value of the course for section 3 to get that crazy score of 99? It's
awesome. I mean, I think it was mostly like the real value in any sort of like tutoring is the people. And like you can learn how to solve like an equation online, like with there's so many resources out there that you can learn the exact method of solving X or Y. But that's not really what section 3 is about. Section 3 is about problem solving primarily, right? It's in the language of science, but it is
the language. That's how I like to phrase it as well.
Yeah,
the language of science.
Yeah, because like the section is called reasoning in biology and physical sciences, something to that effect, right? So I think reach out to, like, if you've got a question and you're just like, I've tried this, and this, and I just can't get better. Like there's something that I'm missing in my prep that I just don't know. There's people that can help. I think that's kind of like the biggest thing.
Speaking about people that can help, there's an ambulance in the background.
Yeah.
There you go.
Might be a fire truck. Yeah, so I think, yeah, like make the most out of whatever resources you have available. If you've got, like for me, I think I was approaching the end of having answered all of the question bank questions by the end, which is a lot. But to me, like it was the being able to see new questions was really valuable, and knowing that there were like ones that I was just gonna struggle with. So I think like ask questions, like reflect as much as you can, and if you get to the point you're just like, I just don't know what I'm doing, that's fine. It'll pass, right? Like, and as you learn new ways to deal with questions or whatever, it's going to feel uncomfortable to try these new things out because it's different. But it doesn't mean that it's worse. Yeah.
Nice. Sweet. All right. Maybe now that we're done with all three of the sections, hopefully that was helpful for everyone. I found it really insightful. I guess the final question before we end off is one concept I always like to talk about is everybody has their ceiling and their floor. Yeah. Right? Your ceiling, probably an 89, 90, maybe higher than an 89. I don't know. But let's say your ceiling is an 89, right? And let's say your floor was a 72 or something like that. I don't know, hypothetically, right? Yeah. Let's just say that, which is a great floor, even if you got if you got the
if that had been what came up on the screen, I would have been stoked.
Sweet.
Let's be honest.
Anyway, an important thing that I always tell my students to think about is don't always think about pushing your ceiling higher, but ensuring that you actually score get as close to your ceiling as possible, right? Yeah. So if your ceiling is a 72, make sure on the day you get as close to that 72 as possible, right? Yeah. A lot of people, they forget about that part. So do you want to tell me the day itself, how you approach the psychology of the exam to ensure that on the day, all of the preparation, you did 4 months of pretty hectic preparation, right? How did you ensure that, because it's a one-day exam, it's a bit frustrating that that's the case, but that's
it was 7:30 until 1-ish.
So 1:30, how did you ensure on the day that all these hours, months of preparation culminated to being executed on the paper?
Yes.
Because that's a big gap for a lot of people.
So early on in my prep, I was reading a book and it was talking about this sort of incremental sort of process-based approach to sort of developing a skill or whatever, or changing the way you live. And it was like, if you think of like compound interest, right? You put a small amount of money in your super when you're young, and like by the time you retire, that's an insane amount of money, right? And so every day, my goal in my prep was to do something for every section, whether it was writing a plan for an essay or doing 15, 20 questions, or like going over previous notes about the immune system, like whatever it was, right? And so over the months of prep, that will accumulate to being like pretty much everything that you've done is kind of already set in stone, right? You're not going any like last minute cramming. It's very unlikely that you're going to have some miraculous moment that revolutionizes your outcome, right? It's possible, but quite unlikely on the whole, right? So I think if I was to say there was one thing that I had tried to do, like the ultimate goal of my prep was to have exactly one thing in my mind that I was thinking as I was logging on to the ACE portal thing to do the exam as I was sitting at that computer. So for section 1, it was to take my time reading and to understand the STEM before I started answering questions. For section 2, it was to plan in depth and to not start writing my essay until I was completely happy with my plan for each task. And then for section 3, it was, oh God, I can't even remember what it was. I think it was kind of similar to section 1. It was just to focus on understanding finding like the very little minor things that ACE does to like turn that from like a hard question to an insanely hard question. So there might be like some little axis thing or some little kind of hard to read presentation of information or something like that, or just reading questions really carefully, right? Like when 2 weeks out from the exam, you're still getting questions wrong, like I was, that say like, which of the following is not this? Like, it's such an easy thing to address, but it can get lost in the forest of prep. And so I think part of that's from my background in skiing was like in our exams, you get 2 runs. Like you go down and it's like, you got to do this. And if you don't do it well enough, you fail, right? So, and if you do, you succeed. But it was like in all your prep, like you work with our trainers or your tutors or whatever it may be. And your goal is to work out what is the one thing that will make you like to address, to keep in your mind, so that then you can use all the rest of your brain to think about what's in front of you.
Yeah, awesome. I think that's a great note to end on.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, Chris.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming in.
That's all right. I suppose there's just like one thing that didn't really come up.
Okay, go for it.
As a general, I'll try to make it as quick as I can.
No,
as a general thing, take care of your body and your mind. Sleep well, eat well. Like, it's so easy to go, oh, like there's not enough time in my day, I'm going to stop sleeping, or I'm going to not drink water, I'm going to drink like a bunch of energy drinks or coffee or whatever, pick your poison. I've done 10-hour days, 12-hour days in the electronics lab at university on a cup of coffee, and it sucks.
Yeah.
It's so hard to concentrate. It's so hard to make the most out of the time you do have. So treat your body well and just get into some amount of a routine as best, whatever that looks like for you. And then try to stick with it.
No, agreed 100%. Wellness is super important.
Yeah.
We have heaps of students that experience burnout. We need to...
I think I was burning out about a week before the exam.
Yeah.
I really tapered back on how much I was doing.
Yeah. And make sure to join our GAMSAT community. Over there, we have a lot of tips, a lot of advice on well-being, a lot of we do activities with the rest of the cohort, kind of think about well-being, taking care of yourself. I think it's super important. Thanks for bringing that up. That's actually a good point. We should have fleshed that out a bit more, but a very good point that you make there. Other than that, I think any other final thoughts, Chris, that you wanted to add?
So I would say, I don't know, I think just a general mentality of trying to just continually improve, but to do it in such a way that you're comparing it to who you were before or what you were capable of before, I think is the most healthy way to do it. Don't become... try not to chase a number. Just try to, like, at the end of the day, you're learning a set of skills that will hopefully serve you well for life. Like this, like studying for Section 2 has changed the way that I look at the world to an extent. Studying for Section 1 has changed the way I read stuff. Like Section 3 as well, like just the preparation over, I guess, the last 10 years of my life studying, right? This isn't just a 3-month prep bender. It's like a combination of a whole bunch of stuff. But yeah, I think just try to enjoy the process, and then on the day, like, you've already put in the work.
Yeah. Awesome. Sweet. Thanks for coming in, Chris.
Making the time.
Hopefully all of you at home enjoyed that. I found it really insightful. Chris, again, absolutely smashed it. Congratulations on the amazing score. If you have any questions, we'll be working with Chris. Just drop them down in the comments below on whatever platform you're watching on, Facebook, YouTube, wherever. We'll hopefully answer them over time. And again, if not in the comments, feel free to message us, reach out to us, email us. We're more than happy. We love continuing the conversation, thinking about it. And good luck to all of you. GAMSAT season starting up again. We'll be doing quite a few of these. Chris, hopefully you'll be seeing more of him.
Maybe.
Really fun podcast today. Cool. Thanks everyone, and hopefully see you around. Take care.
All right.
Sweet.